I want superheroes in my politics. Let me explain. I don't want politics in my superheroes, but rather I want superheroes in my politics. You see, there's a lot of discourse around whether or not we should have politics in our superheroes. And by politics, let's be honest, most people don't really care if you add some type of economic policy, if you talk about tariffs or something like that. But they do care about social politics being added into their superhero stories or their fiction in general, especially if these social politics are made up of modern day contrivances, so to speak, or modern day social issues. And that makes sense when you think about it. A lot of the modern day social issues wouldn't be able to be applied to a medieval village. After all, these are social issues. And unless you have the same social and cultural background, you probably wouldn't have as many of these issues. At least they would have a different tinge to them. While on the other hand, what I'm talking about is superheroes in my politics. And what I mean by that again is that when you have someone who can lift a mountain or who can move at speeds that you literally can't touch them, that weaponry is completely nothing to them. When you have someone who can read minds or someone who can heal back from any injury, all of a sudden, that person and that level of power that they have becomes inherently political. And by inherently political, I don't mean that automatically they have to be political. I mean that the political powers of the world have to think about them in that way. Again, imagine this. If China suddenly has a Superman-like figure, a figure who can fly at super strength, and they're so durable that they can survive nukes, then we have to look at that politically. You can't deny that the US government or other governments who are more hostile to China wouldn't look at that as an issue. When you look at someone like Captain America, it only makes sense that other people would start to try to make Captain America or super soldier-esque people in their own countries just to try to make the balance of power a little bit more balanced. And that's something that I think is very cool about superheroes being involved in politics, or rather, not the exact opposite. I think that the fact that they have so much power would be, again, super interesting to explore. And the thing is, I can actually show multiple examples of that being incredibly cool. And all you have to look at is, of course, first and foremost, Justice League Unlimited, the TV show, and season 1 specifically. In season 1 of Justice League Unlimited, you had this whole plot line of Cadmus, this government organization run by Maria, I think her name is, not Maria, sorry, run by Amanda Waller, who is this, very powerful, like former CIA, intelligence agent who basically runs that organization because she fears that the Justice League has too much power. And again, when you really look at it, it makes perfect sense. Why would the US government want there to be another organization that has more power than they have? I mean, some people are going to be paranoid regardless, just because of the level of power that they have, and they're going to make actions against it. They're going to try to do what they can to maintain control. So when you think of it like that, that makes perfect sense. And of course, this conflict with Cadmus made a massive, impact on the overall universe. It was very cool to see even some of the superheroes themselves having to choose between the US government and what, the Justice League represented, being, great and powerful and friendly superheroes who wanted to do good, just good for its, own sake, versus the interests of the US government. And that's always super interesting to explore. So that brought upon a lot of super interesting, super compelling conflict in that story alone. Of course, another one is Jinwoo and Solo Leveling. There's a lot of political games that start getting played amongst these different powerful hunter characters. And it becomes very interesting when you add in other countries like America and China, and how these hunters are basically, especially if they get to S-class, are basically living nukes in a lot of ways. And so whoever has the most S-class hunters becomes basically the world power. I think Japan is able to do that, or rather Korea is able to do that as well. In this case, this is specifically a Korean webtoon, but they're able to do that because I think that unlike Americans tend to look at the world as America. We are the biggest power in the world. And because of that, we don't really think about how someone of that power would affect other countries. Like if a Superman appeared, a lot of people throughout, the rest of the world would look at Superman as an American superhero because he is American. And because of that, they would say to themselves, I can't go to war or even make a big conflict with America, because if I do, who knows if Superman is going to join with them? He probably is going to join with their side. That's just what they think. It doesn't matter whether or not he would actually do that. What matters is what they believe he would do. And because of that, they'd have to, of course, find their own superhero. And of course, Jinwoo and the Solo Leveling story really goes into that, as people try to vie and grab their S-class superheroes. But that's not the only type of story you can tell with that. Two very similar type of stories were, Civil War, the MCU, when we saw that, again, superheroes made some mistakes. They had too much collateral damage, and the countries of the world came together to try to deal with that issue, to try to rein those superheroes in. I will admit that's a more Western, European, American sort of viewpoint on the issue, that the world would unite together and attempt to come over and try to stop this issue, rather than, different countries having their own separate programs to try to do things. Again, I would think that something like the MCU, you would definitely have, realistically, someone like China or Russia trying to find their own superhumans. You'd think that every single country would deal with a group like the mutants differently, or the same? Of course not. They would view it all differently. They would do their best that they possibly could to attempt to have their own superhero teams. They would not be fine with America having, the X-Men, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the Defenders, other teams like that. They would not be fine with that. They'd be wanting to make their own superhero teams, both publicly and, of course, covertly. And I just think that would be a bigger issue. I love when that happens. Another great example of this, of that politics being involved in superheroes, again from Marvel, is the Kingdom Come storyline of Thor, or also known as the Reign arc. I call it the Asgard on Earth arc. That's what I call it, but it's called the Reign arc officially. And that was an arc within Thor comics when Odin at that point in time was dead, and Thor had the All-Father's power. And with that power, he chose to bring Asgard to Earth. He brought Asgard, this massive city of gods, right above New York City. And then he would move down and be a hero, even while being this super powerful Odin godlike figure. And he tried to solve a lot of humanity's problems. He tried to give them free energy using, Asgardian magic. He came with Asgardian medicine and healed all types of children. But the problem was that his very presence, just being in that world and being, again, you got to remember, Thor is supposed to be like basically a heathen god in a predominantly Christian world or Muslim world as well. So you have all the other religions kind of having to deal with the fact that this heathen god, this Thor figure, exists. Now they have to fit that in. So you also got to look at how religion would be affected by some of these characters appearing. And it was a very cool exploration of the different things that can happen. One of the things that happened, and there became a cult, so to speak, or a new religion popped up of Thorist, who worshipped Thor as a god, as a deity, and they thought Thor Day was their day off. They petitioned to have that day off and respect their freedom of religion. And it was a very super interesting storyline. Again, religion, politics, all these things get involved. Thor, obviously being this heroic godlike figure, couldn't understand why he shouldn't be able to intervene whenever he wanted to, and whenever he wanted to. And obviously this brought him to conflict with not just the US government, but different world governments across the world. And just random individuals, mutants and other people like that also had problems with what Thor was doing. And it brought him into conflict eventually with even his own friends. So I think that's a very interesting thing to do, to add in not politics to superheroes, but add in superheroes to politics. Because again, a lot of these characters would be political, not because they want to be, but because politics would force them to be. Other countries, whether it be other countries attempting to make their own superheroes and challenge the overall power. I can imagine a country trying to, get their own superheroes, but eventually even wanting to go to war if they feel like they have the most powerful superheroes. They feel like, I have superheroes that are way more powerful than your group. I could defeat you and take you over. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened. Superheroes fighting on the battlefield. We saw this with Captain America. Whether it be governments trying to rein in superhuman individuals, like we saw inside Civil War, or it be just, the government attempting to challenge superhuman individuals, have their own counter force to those guys, like we saw in Justice League and the Cadmus arc. I think that these types of ideas are just super cool to go into, and I love it every time they do it. Unfortunately, these days we don't do it as much. And again, I saw like Invincible, for example, is more of a story of an outside threat, the Viltrumite threat coming in versus it being the implications of having a super powerful human being be, on Earth, so to speak. The same thing goes for stories like The Boys and whatnot. But I would love to see more future stories where we add in, again, superheroes to politics. We allow them to see what would be the effect of something like that. I remember seeing a video where someone was talking about this guy, a YouTuber by the name of Classic Man D, this shout out to him. But he made a video about how if he had the powers of Juggernaut, this super powerful, super strong character who's basically invincible, that he could definitely just walk into Congress and tell them to figure stuff out, And the thing is, if a superhero did that, what would you be able to do about it? More importantly, would you make different safeguards to try to stop that from happening? Because while even with superheroes don't want to be political, you definitely can't deny that there would be some people who would get superpowers who would be or want to be political. And that could be very interesting. Imagine a political movement starting around a superhero who wants to change things. That's all super interesting things that can be added in there without ultimately adding in social issues. I think social issues would be added in there eventually, but I think there would be a secondary concern to the pure power of these characters. Again, I think power and politics are not just inextricably linked together, but they're almost inseparable from each other. If you don't have power, you can't enforce your political will. And superheroes or superpowered individuals, whether it be from space, from a different culture up in space, or it be, from, literal gods, or it be regular humans just getting superhuman abilities. All that stuff just throws the balance of power out of whack. And to see different countries having to grapple with that, to see different people having to grapple with that change of power, that change of worldview that would bring, that's just my favorite thing ever. I would love to see that. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. I hope to see what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe for further content. And I'll see you again next time in the next Black Tiger Quick Talk.